Hello, everyone. I'd just like to welcome everyone back to school for our spring semester here, 2014. I trust that you had a great break. I know I did, but I'm ready to get back to work here and to cover some very important concepts that we haven't got to yet. We're moving along really well as far as throughout the curriculum, but we've got a lot to do. So anyway, just to go ahead and get started. First of all, today here was our bell ringer for today, and students were asked to complete this in their journal. And it says, just to imagine you were from another country moving to the U.S. for the first time, and how were things different? Describe that in maybe a 5-sentence paragraph. So students did that. They did a great job with it. Also, our essential questions. First of all, why were immigrants attracted to the United States? We should be able to answer that. Also, how would you evaluate the contributions of Jane Addams? Now, remember that term evaluate, I've italicized that there just to remind us that that's an important word. When we evaluate something, we explain worth, okay, offer suggestions on how to improve something. An evaluation is kind of like a grade. So you're going to kind of give a grade to, you should be able to give a grade to Jane Addams after this lesson. In order to begin a unit, I usually try to start with vocabulary, and today we used what we called Freyer models, and students, some of the students were familiar with this strategy, but just to kind of give you an overview here of what we did today, we made 3 Freyer models, one for each vocabulary term. And the first term that we had was a term called urbanization. Okay, and in this graphic organizer, there's 4 quadrants. The first quadrant is simply for the definition in the student's own words, characteristics describing the term, examples, and then non-examples. So let's make my font a little bigger here. And the definition for urbanization, and students were asked to look this up in their textbook and put it in their own words, it's simply the growth of cities. Okay, so we're learning about a time period in history where people are moving from the rural areas to urban areas. So we looked at a pie chart to where in 1880, approximately a quarter of the country lived in big cities. By 40 years later, by 1920, over half of the country's population were concentrated in big cities like New York City and Chicago. So now as far as characteristics of urbanization, first of all, cities were located near transportation routes. Very important. Also, factories were very common. Most immigrants, when they moved to the United States, they worked in factories. Immigrants, let's make our font a little smaller here. Ran out of room a little bit there. Population was high. And there were a lot of big buildings. Okay, so those are some characteristics of urbanization. Now, urbanization was happening in several places in the country, but the 2 main cities were New York City and Chicago. Okay, both of those places, like I said, were located near transportation routes. The city of Chicago, in particular, was connected to a vast number of railroads, as also being on the coast of Lake Michigan. There was very important for the growth of Chicago. New York City, obviously, with its location and its access to the Atlantic Ocean, and immigrants having to come through New York City to come to the United States, made New York City grow into what would eventually become the most famous and the largest city in the world. So, non-examples of urbanization would be, small towns, okay, farmland, rural areas, that kind of thing. So this is just a simple graphic organizer just to kind of help you to remember what urbanization is. Now let's move on to our next term. So open up a new Frayer model here. The next term that we have is, and I'll zoom in here a little bit. The next term is slum. Okay, and by definition, a slum is a part of the city where poor people are usually forced to live. Okay, because of lots of different reasons, poor people are usually forced to live in these areas of the city. These are usually where it's less expensive to live here, but the conditions are usually far from ideal. So, characteristics of a slum: very poorly maintained. Also, apartment buildings, and those were usually called tenements, were very dangerous. Very crowded and unsanitary. Okay, it was not uncommon to see a family of maybe 7 or 8 living in a one-room apartment tenement that is very poorly maintained and very dangerous. And I have an example here that I can show you. Here's a photograph of a typical tenement. You can see very crowded, not a very nice place to live. And we talked about what's wrong with this picture. These people look like they're in pretty bad shape, but this is America. This is the land of opportunity. Why are they forced to live in a place like this? So that's something for you to think about as we study this lesson. We know that immigrants are a very important part of the country, a part of our country's history. Without immigrants, we wouldn't be the country that we are. So, but just think about how the idea of coming to America and America being the land of opportunity, and why these people are forced to live in these poor conditions. So, just something to think about. Now, examples. Kind of like the last term, poor neighborhoods of Chicago and New York City were the most common. Now, a non-example of a slum would be those wealthy neighborhoods. Okay, mansions. Okay, that's completely the opposite of a tenement. Tenements would be an example of something that you would see in a slum, so I'll throw that in there too. All right, now, so this doesn't seem like it's really a good thing going on here, but there is help on the way. And let me open up a new Frayer model here. And the next term that we learned was the term settlement house. Now, a settlement house is very important, and they were popping up all over the country. The most famous ones happening, like I said, in big cities like Chicago and New York City. The first one in Chicago, but these were community centers for those in need. Okay, and characteristics of a settlement house: they provided lots of things to help people with their basic needs: food, shelter, clothing, education, help with employment, and medicine. Because, we talked about how a lot of the places where these people lived were very unsanitary, so sickness was a common thing. The first example, and the most famous by far, let me make this a little bigger here, was Hull House in Chicago. Okay, this was founded by Jane Addams. So we can go back to our essential question there, talking about Jane Addams. This is her big thing. She founded Hull House. And the name Hull House, the name comes from the person who owned the house before it was turned into the community center. And people came to Hull House to find help with employment, help with education, help with clothing, with medicine. They had boys and girls clubs for kids to occupy their time and to give them to be something involved in. So Jane Addams was very, very important in reforming life for those in need, particularly immigrants. So another example of a settlement house in the state of Tennessee was the Bethlehem House in Nashville. So that's just another example, kind of more close to home. Now, the opposite of a settlement house would be those tenements where people were living. Okay, those tenements were, that people were trying to get away from that situation, and settlement houses gave them a place to go. Gave them a place where they could just get away from those conditions for a little while. So anyway, that's just kind of a quick overview of our lesson today. You should be able to answer those two essential questions, particularly the one relating to Jane Addams. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Oh, and one more thing. Our summarizer for the day, we made an acrostic. And we used Jane Addams' last name. So what I would like for you to do is use Jane Addams' last name and describe her, really essentially evaluate her, using those words in the form of an acrostic. So please, that's all I have. Hopefully this will help you if if you were absent or if you just need a little bit of a review. And please email me if you have any questions. Have a good day.